Welcome back to KKC Consulting. Now for today we have a really special episode. Instead of a business professional, we have a professional who's in the engineering realm but has combined business as well. So business and tech, and I feel this will be a really fun episode, especially for our engineers who watch the show as well. Now Ian, thank you so much for coming on the show. And do you mind giving us a little bit of a synopsis?
Yeah, so basically I'm someone who really used to want to go into business. But then, I tried out a couple of different things. I figured out that, I really love the business aspect of things, but I really want to get hands-on, right? I enjoy coming up not only with the solution, but I enjoy going really hands-in on the solution myself. So I was someone who really wanted to go into business, had a lot of business extracurriculars, did DECA for a couple of years, helped organize DECA. And then I decided, hey, maybe engineering is more for me. Tried a couple of things like attempting to launch a startup. I went ahead and went to go study engineering. And then from there, I picked up a couple of more technological internships. So I worked at a startup based out of Toronto. It's called Responsibly, and now they're called Sibly. And then I also worked for Bloomberg in New York. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's amazing. So as you guys know, Waterloo Engineering, and he's combined that with business. Amazing stuff. Now, I kind of wanted to just talk about Hack the North, right? You were a part of that program. Do you mind walking us through that and telling us a bit about your experience in that?
Yeah, so I'll start off by saying that Hack the North is not only powerful for the people that organize it, it's also powerful for the people that compete in it. In fact, I think one of the main reasons that I switched into engineering was because of Hack the North. I was in grade 12. I didn't know much about tech. Right. I thought that Java and JavaScript were the same thing, and then I was trying to find a converter online to convert between the two, and I couldn't. And I was wondering, why is it not working? Because, we only studied Java in high school.
Right.
And, I realized just through that weekend, I met a lot of interesting people, and I really enjoyed getting, hands-on with the solution. We wanted to create a gesture-controlled drone. That's kind of like an aerial firefighter. It can go ahead and identify fires. And that project ended up being a catalyst for a lot of essays, a lot of things that I wrote about how, we can combine technology and innovation in business to create solutions to ongoing problems. But it was also just that one weekend was probably one of the main reasons why I decided to switch, because I enjoyed, being hands-on so much. So then when I switched into engineering, and then I went to Waterloo, and then, that was my first Hack the North back when I was in grade 12. And I was, second Hack the North, we built what you can basically classify as a search engine for your memories. So, the memories is this, right? Yeah. They're special because, the people you meet, the experiences you have, the different things you do along the way. But, over time, these memories fade. You just have a feeling, right? But wouldn't it be great if you could go back and, rewatch, your top, 20 favorite moments, if only you just managed to record them, right? So you built this device that, you attach to yourself and records everything you see. And then you can actually go ahead and you can say, tell me about a time when, I was talking about podcasts, and would go ahead and it would bring you up clips of all the time you were talking about podcasts, or you were on a podcast, or you were watching a podcast, so anything related to podcasts. So I ended up building that. It was lots of fun. And then, I wanted to get involved with the team. So remember, I wanted to get involved almost immediately, but then I also realized that to be an organizer, you'd have to wait until, January, February when applications opened up. So what I ended up doing instead was I went to a couple of other hackathons, broadened my skills, built up not only the ability to come up with ideas, but the ability to execute on them as well.
Right.
And then once, January, February rolled around, I applied, and then I ended up joining the team as a logistics organizer. So what that meant is I took on ownership of the workshops and mentorship projects. So, you have a, 3-day long event, and you have to organize all of the workshops for them, and you have to come up with a way to bring around 150 mentors to the event.
Wow.
So I think the question of that is, given that you're given so much agency over a project, how do you execute that project?
Right.
And it definitely started with a lot of planning, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of thoughts of, what do we want to see in this project, and what do we perhaps want to change from previous years. But, the second thought is, how do you make this experience valuable for everyone, right? When you're organizing an event, it's not about how, the individual groups of people feel. You have hackers, you have sponsors, you have mentors, you have workshop leads, all these people that are all part of the event. But then you also have to think about how, how do they all integrate together? Right? How do you make so many people come in one place and all have a good time? So I think eventually it came down to, defining what I like to call the experience, right? So, let's say a mentor shows up to the event, how do they interact with different projects? How will they eat? How will they sleep? How will they even sign into the event? And then when they're at the event, how will they help hackers? So it definitely comes down to a lot to defining the experience for all these people. And then for workshop leads, it came down a lot to, these people, they're organizing a workshop. How do we best help them organize a workshop, right? These are all very accomplished people. They're all very smart. And what can we do to help them? So eventually came down to, a lot of planning. It came down to a lot of thinking about how all these different people will experience the event. And it came down to, then putting all of that into action. I know it's definitely a lot of work, and it's a lot of fun. And that's why I know moving into next year's Hack the North now, I really think it'll be something incredible.
It will. That's something I actually wanted to touch upon. Just your leadership experience, because you did mention earlier on that it's business and tech that you wanted to combine, right?
Yeah.
And everyone knows that in business, it's really important to have leadership skills. So exactly how were you able to integrate just everyone, make sure everyone had a fun time, but make sure everyone was effective in whatever role they had?
Yeah, I think eventually when you think about your business skills, it's a lot of, it comes down to like, how do you lead, right? Because how you will lead different groups of people will depend on, what kind of people are they, what is, the end goal. And I think for me, I was able to transfer a lot of my more soft skills that I picked up, especially during DECA, right? Like first and foremost, when you're leading people, you have to speak. Right. And, if you're, standing there, you're kind of, you have bad posture, you're crouching forward, you're speaking very quietly, nobody's going to think that you know what you're talking about, even if you are the complete subject matter expert on this topic. So what it came down to was, taking all these good skills, like, standing upright, projecting your voice. And, when you're on the day of the event and you're asking people like, hey, if you're mentoring now, like, if you could just head over to this area, that's where, all of the hackers will be going for help. That's A. So on the day of the event, you have to, go project yourself. You have to be confident. You have to go out and talk to people. And I think that talking to people essentially is also a skill. It's something that you pick up a lot of times in business, but it's not unique to just business. I think that regardless of what you go into, you'll need it. I think the second part of it is, it's also online communication, right? Like, how do you come off, when you are online? And I think that, communicating over the internet is difficult, especially when, you're not exactly always able to convey what you want. Like, you may forget something, right? And at the end of the day, you're sending an email, you forget something may be important. I mean, it's also not the end of the world. But you also have to think about how, you're conducting yourself online. Let's say you need like 200 people to fill out a form. What's the best way to go about doing so? So I think it's, also a key skill to learn how to be like very well spoken for a lot of people. And I think that's definitely one thing that came for me from business. And I think that just being able to convey your idea at the end of the day, what are you trying to say? How do people not get confused by what you mean, even if you're asking them to do like a 6-step process? Like, have you ever gotten one of those emails where they ask you to do like a long set of tasks, and then you're halfway through one of the tasks, and there's a step missing, and you have absolutely no clue how to get through it, and then you have to send them an email. You're like, what do I do now? Right? I think just being able to, if you need people to, do something for you, like fill out a form or, sign up here or register on a site, then just being able to articulate to them how exactly they can do that. So, they don't come back to you with like 15 questions, so that you're able to effectively communicate what you're trying to say.
No, I agree with that 100%. And even there's so many emails I get with a CTA, right? Call to action. They make it so complicated sometimes. Like, you don't understand the audience is a 17-year-old kid. I'm not going to... My attention span's like this. I'm not going to spend so long trying to understand how do I do this. But like a great example of someone who's really simplified the process, IKEA, right? When you're building, I could have built something from IKEA when I was like 14 years old. Even though I'm absolutely garbage at building stuff, right? Just a simple process, and I feel that's what you really wanted to relate on, right? Yeah,
and I think just a lot of the time in engineering too, it's also about the the user experience, right? Like when a user uses something, how do they experience it? I think a good example is also IKEA, right? Like you can build something and it works and you're able to do it, no matter how old you are. And I think that's a great user experience. But I also think be a company that does really well at user experience is Apple. Like, you go into an iPhone, like you try to do almost anything, you can either very easily figure out how to do it yourself, or B, you can search it up online. And I also think that the Apple user experience is very user friendly, right? It's really easy everything's very accessible. So I think just, keeping that in mind, like that's also a component that's typically underlooked in engineering. It's typically, how complex is your system, or, how big is the problem you're solving. But at the end of the day, if you have a really complex solution and nobody can use it, that's not really, something that's friendly to the user, right? Being able to have, a concrete user experience is definitely something that you definitely need no matter what kind of product you're building.
Right. And then I guess that kind of takes us into your internships at Bloomberg. I kind of wanted to talk about that. If you don't mind just giving a little bit of synopsis of what exactly Bloomberg is, but also your role in that as well.
Yeah, so I joined Bloomberg as an intern after my first year at the University of Waterloo studying software engineering, and it was all the way in New York, right? So first of all, here from Toronto, hop on a plane, go to New York, a new country, right? New York is very similar in a lot of ways to Toronto, but it's also different. So you just have to it takes a little bit of time to get adjusted.
Right.
But as an intern there, it was after my first year, and then obviously I look around, and a lot of the people are a lot older than me, right?
Right.
They're fourth year, third year, a couple of second years too. And I had someone there that I knew too who was also first year. So it was definitely a nice experience, talking to a lot of people. But I think so, when you're entering the workforce, and especially I think at Bloomberg, they're basically a financial company. They provide a lot of financial data for companies to use for things like investment analysis. And they also have a news platform. They also have a philanthropies platform. Really big on their actually philanthropy division. I think they do a lot of great work. But I think that just coming in, I think the first thing that was definitely really appreciated is, especially when you're going through the interview process, it definitely felt a lot like a lot of employers will care about your age. Waterloo, especially with the 5-year program, they know I still have 4 years of school to go, right? And especially because it was through, the Waterloo, co-op board program. It's called the Waterloo Works. They knew that ahead of time too. But I really appreciated the fact that, they still gave me a chance, to go to the interview stage. And I think it was based a lot on both technical and behavioral skills. So it felt really nice to, be assessed. Everyone was assessed the same, regardless of how old you are. So I think that was definitely very nice and very welcoming to have in the interview process. But then when you're there too, it's, you start working on a project with your team, right? Your team is usually anywhere. In my experience, it was 4 other people other than myself, right? And it was very nice. I had a mentor to work with. And essentially, I was working on, semantic technology, something similar to what I did previously at Hack the North with, search engine and being able to search through different videos. But it was a different application of semantic technology. And I think it was very nice. I had a lot of support. And I think that at the end of the day, when you have such independence over a project, it also comes down to the design process, right? You have this problem in front of you, and they have, this kind of, you're asked to come up with a solution. You figure out, okay, A, how do I design the solution? B, when you're coming up with designing a solution, you have to consider who is using, the product or the project I'm designing, right? And you have to keep that in mind, because if you just design, once again, it's not always about technical complexity, right? It's about, if, this person, the stakeholder, whether they're internal or external, is going to be using this product, how will they use it? Why will they use it? What kind of problems can you foresee them running into? And I think a lot of that is often underlooked in the design process, especially when you're just starting out, you're just building projects, but it's definitely something that you see a lot more and more once you go into the professional field. Right. So I think that even having the experience to go through that whole process as someone who is just in their first year was definitely amazing. And I think it definitely works a lot too, because as you continue on building out your project, you don't suddenly run into issues where, oh, we didn't consider that factor. So now whenever this user tries to onboard or this user, tries to use the product, they have this restriction, right? You don't run into a lot of that along the way, which basically means that if you kind of shift left, your thinking process, if you put a lot of your design thinking, a lot of your business thinking at the very start, you can spend a lot more time coming up with a, good solution. And then it takes a lot less time to, implement it, because you implement it and there's not that many changes you have to put in. Right. I mean, obviously that's not a strategy that works for every company, but I think it was very nice in this process because there's a lot of time dedicated to actually thinking of how to build the product and then, slowly building it out and thinking about all the different design considerations. And then when it's time to integrate it, it was pretty simple. You didn't have to change that many things. You thought of all these things ahead of time. Right. So definitely, I think shifting left when thinking and really applying those business skills is definitely key. If you're ever interning and you have a project you need to build, definitely some things to consider.
100% key. I agree with you a lot. And Duolingo, amazing example of someone who's really tried to make it as simple as possible, right? My 4-year-old brother could play Duolingo, right? It's so easy to use it. And I feel that a lot of, me personally, I used to code as well, right? A long time ago.
Yeah.
I used to code, and I remember this one class, grade 11 class with this teacher. He was a hard-ass teacher. He taught me a lot. He was super duper hard, right? Yeah. Now, this grade 11 teacher, when I used to code things, right? I remember there was this one interface where it was a culminating project. We essentially had to, it was like a car repair mechanic thing.
Okay.
You had to click on a part that you might have destroyed when you rented out the car.
Okay.
It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool.
Okay.
But essentially, he was being really honest with me. He told me, listen, coding's good, right? Design is shit, right?
Yeah.
Like, he told me that it has to be easy for the user to use it. And I learned a lot from that project, right? The understanding that, listen, it's not only about the work you put in to solve a problem,
Yeah.
but it's also how your market sees that problem being solved.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, right? Like, their perception on that problem.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to think, like, what if you want to, extend this project, right? Like, looking at the code, is this something that's easily extendable? Or, would you have to go ahead, would you have to refactor some things, make things, like, easier to use? And it's definitely, like, usability is a big thing. Like, regardless of, whether this is the work that you'll be continuing or somebody else takes on, after you're done your internship, right? You have to think about, the next person who's picking this up are they going to be able to use this? Or is it going to be a lot of work for them to understand what exactly is going on here?
Yeah, that's another thing my grade 11 teacher emphasized a lot. Like, an insane amount. Always we code it in C#, so the slashes for notes. Yeah. Anytime we coded, we had to put notes. Yeah. And it's great practice, right? Like, if I ever go into coding, for example, right? Yeah. It's so important that I put notes in case someone else wants to work on the project, right? Yeah. Like, even for my group, when we were doing the car rental thing, my group did not understand what I was coding until I put the notes down, right? Yeah. Like, I'll just be typing jargon, but as soon as I put the notes down, it made more sense. It was more structured, right? Yeah. And that's something really, really important I learned from that.
Yeah, and I think just like commenting your code in general, right? Like, especially if someone's, like, it's common practice in industry to, write code and then have somebody else review it. If you don't have any comments, someone's going to look at it and they're not going to really understand what's going on. Exactly. But, it's like, looking at a problem being solved in a textbook, and then, they have, like, a couple of, like, notes side by side, or a couple of comments beside the problem being solved. And then suddenly, like, when you go from, like, step to step in the problem, you start to understand, like, oh, why did they transform this variable? Or, why did this transformation happen? So yeah, definitely it's good practice, even though it's a lot more work to write your code well. I definitely think it goes well for making long-standing but also very extendable systems.
Right, and that can apply to anything as well, right? Yeah. Like, when last year, I was trying to learn kinematics, right? Yeah. Grade 12, you got to get a really good physics grade, right? Kinematics in of itself is pretty easy to understand if you have proper steps, right? Yeah. And after I understood those steps, like, oh, that's why. Okay, that makes more sense, right? Gravity is negative 9.8 meters per second squared, right? Yeah. But the problem was, at first I had no idea what the steps were, so it just made it a lot harder. But again, it's the idea that, make it as simple as possible, right? Yeah. And now moving on, I also wanted to talk about your time at Responsibly, right? Yeah. You were able to create pipelines for that. Do you mind talking about that with the audience? Yeah,
so it's basically the step of, let's say we want to get, like, data, but, the data we want to get is, it's not feasible to get at the moment. So what are some other ways we could come up with, getting the data? And it's definitely coming up with an alternative solution to a straightforward problem, right? Like, let's say I am building a software for, I don't know, let's say a car mechanic, right? And you need to get details on all of the cars that are available. Obviously it's one thing to, just have the pre-existing, list of data, like what is every car available. But then you might run into problems like, maybe difficult to source this data, or, maybe the list isn't complete. So what are some other ways that you could go about, getting this data? And it was essentially like, it was a lot more of like, like a research project and more of a proof of concept, figuring out like, okay, if we have some simple tools, like, some LLMs that we have, and if we're able to, grab all this data from the internet, how we can just transform like, raw internet data into the data we're looking for. And I think that it was a very interesting project. It taught me a lot of, system design thinking, once again, thinking out like, how do you go ahead and, solve this problem. But I actually think it was a good teaching moment, because that's when I honestly was not really applying my business skills, right? Like, I was going ahead, I was trying to come up with a solution. But, I remember my mentor and my manager kept on telling me, they're like, to come up with the design first, and you can go ahead and then you code it up. And I was so eager to get coding that, I'd come up with something, and they'd think of something like, hey, how do we solve this problem? And I was like, oh, I didn't think of that. And I go ahead and I like, spend another week coding it up, and I come back and say, they're like, this is great, but we didn't also think about this thing, right? So I had to go back, fix it. And then as you have more and more moving parts to the system, it takes a lot more time to change, right? And I was spending a lot more time coding than I was spending, like, at first just, sitting down, thinking the system through and designing it. And I think it wasn't honestly until like a month in when I honestly sat down, I made some charts. I went through, okay, this is the entire flow that we're going to have. This is how we think we're going to solve the problem. And this is the existing parts we already have, and this is what we have left to code. And I think that, at that moment I realized that, hey, I had a lot of the components that, I just had to modify them slightly. But, when you're designing this, you realize, okay, wait, here's some other things I did not miss. I did miss and that weren't brought up to me yet, right? So you start to figure out, like, okay, hey, maybe this part of the solution we want to make, maybe it's not actually that important, or maybe it doesn't really integrate that well with what you're doing. Like, I remember we were considering doing things like multilingual data, and at one point we were like, okay, maybe that's something we put for later, right? That's not the main focus right now. Let's focus on making the system. And I think that after, I sat down, made some charts, figured out the whole system, and they looked at it and they gave some really good constructive feedback, and I was able to change it around a little bit. That's when it comes to the part of, okay, now we have a good system. Let's actually go ahead and build it. But I found myself, coding a lot more than designing. And then I found myself rewriting a lot of the code that I was doing because it simply, wasn't, the best solution or the best design or the best practice. And I realized that because I wasn't seeing the bigger picture.
Right. And that's a massive part of entrepreneurship as well, right? Like when I was designing, I'm still currently designing like a clothing brand that I want to release next year sometime. But I realized that I was so excited on like ordering it straight from Pakistan or China, right? Doing the whole thing, getting the sweater and be like, oh, let me make some quick money, right? But it's the idea of having a full blueprint, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Making sure that you contacted the manufacturers, you contacted their competitors, make sure you get a good price. The material has to be good, make sure there's embroidery, the zip is, good, whatever else it might be, right? The idea that you have a step by step process, right? Rather than me just going ahead ordering a random piece of clothing just because, and it's also expensive, right? It costs a lot. The first sample size is like $100, right? That's afterwards, that's when it starts to get a bit cheaper, right? But that idea ties in really nicely to your entrepreneurship adventures. Floto, do you mind talking about that and giving a bit of a synopsis there?
And I think this is a good alternate story about blueprints. So let's get into it. When I was finishing up grade 11, I was like, what am I going to do with my summer? One of the things that happened that year is I joined DECA as a provincial officer. So it was a lot of organizing events, and that's how I think I really got my start and my love for organizing events. But, I was thinking of okay, what other thing am I going to do this summer? Because, I can't just sit around all day, right? And I think I had the same thought of I can't sit around all day back when I was, in grade 9. That's when COVID just started, right? Everyone's at home, everyone's doing nothing. Like, what are you doing? You're sitting at home, you're playing video games. And suddenly I start to realize that, okay, I could sit at home and play video games every single day, but I really need to be doing something that is at least a little bit different. So I remember for my birthday, I got, a drone. It's this drone, it's called the Mavic Mini. And it's produced by a company called DJI. And I think this is actually a perfect starter drone for anyone considering, working with drones or even using them for recreational photography, because they're 1 or 2 grams under the the limit in Canada, where if your drone is any heavier, you need a license to fly it. Right?
Oh, I see.
So it's got a great camera. I can record awesome video. It flies with great range, and you don't even need a license for it. Right, so me in grade 9 wanted to just fly some drones around and take some photos. I was like, okay, this is awesome. Let me take up my time with this. So remember, a lot of the days, in the morning or sometime in the afternoon, I'd hop on my bike. I'd go outside. I'd bike to a random forest. Take some photos, and I'd be like, wow, these are some photos I have. This is it's awesome. I remember we went with some family up north to a cottage, and then I took some photos there. Awesome sunset. Photos, videos, a lot of B-roll. And then when I was in grade 11, I was like, okay, I saw this program. It was called the Ontario Summer Company Program. And basically, they give you a $3,000 grant to start your own business. And I was like, okay, this is awesome. I've always wanted to try, entrepreneurship. Let me see if, this is for me. So then I went ahead. I remember I applied, and then eventually I heard back from them, and they're like, this is awesome. We'd love to have you as part of the summer's program. And I was like, okay, great. And it's awesome too because it's run by, I believe they have regional divisions where it's run basically entirely by your city. So I was like, okay, great. I get some money to start my own business. Not as much risk for me. I just put in my time and I can go for it, right? And then I did. But I think that one thing that I realized about, blueprints and planning is you also can't get super caught up in planning. Because I remember that a lot of the time I was thinking of, okay, I was starting up, the business. I was thinking, okay, how will I, just begin outreach? How will I grow? How will I build up my portfolio? And all of these things, you're thinking through, what is the best way to do them? But at a certain point, you spend so much time planning and not so much time doing that you get very caught up in planning. And I wanted everything to be perfect. Right? But I think that if I could go back and I could change one thing, I think it would be to like, almost entirely like plan a lot less, right? Like once you have a good, vision of what you think it should be, at a certain point you just have to start doing. Especially if, you're one person, you have to think about all these things. Like you have to make a strategy, you have to go out and you have to, get clients, you have to shoot videos, photos for them, whatever, come back, edit them, and then send them out with all like a reasonable time frame. Like those are a lot of things for one person to be doing, which means you have to be efficient and you can't spend that much time planning. And I think that if I could go back, I would definitely spend a lot less time planning because I definitely think that's one of the things that I really got stuck on. And I think that's one of the things that, eventually contributed to perhaps not doing as well as I wanted it to.
Right.
But I definitely think it's a good experience, for life in general. Like once you got a plan, just go for it.
Yeah.
The rest will be history. The rest you'll figure out as you're going along.
That's an amazing thing that, like, I had a podcast yesterday as well with Syed. That's probably going to release in like 2 weeks time. But essentially he also talks about the idea of like, you just have to take the first step, right?
You have to.
As much as, the whole planning thing is super important, an entrepreneur, you got to fail before you succeed, right? You have to. Alex Hermosi talks about this, Simon Squibb. Anyone you see, they will talk about this. You have to take the first step, right? And he actually describes it, you're a physics, amazing at physics as well, so you'll understand it. But an object is always in motion unless it's stopped, right?
Yeah.
So like as long as you're taking the first steps, you're still going to get somewhere until you stop, right?
Yeah.
And then that's when you really fall down and you just give up. So you can't be doing that. You always have to make sure that, you're working on that first step. And to kind of like, you gave advice on that aspect, but do you have any other advice for anyone who wants to go in the entrepreneurship field, or actually, even better, someone who wants to combine business and tech?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the time when you're thinking about combining business and tech, about, trying out both, I think the first thing you have to think about is, do you really enjoy both? Like, can you confidently say that, I enjoy business and I enjoy, technology? Is it, do you like, the idea of them? Do you actually enjoy them? Do you enjoy one a lot more than the other, but the other sounds like relatively appealing? Yeah. Or are you genuinely passionate about both of them? And I'd say that, it's definitely not for everyone, but I definitely say that, at least personally, I've, enjoyed it. And I think that, even if you choose to, very strongly your engineering or very strongly into business, that the skills you will grab from the other will definitely like translate back and forth, like whether it's systems design thinking or whether it's your soft skills or whether it's anything you think of, regardless of what you choose. I think that, eventually like the skills from everywhere will interweave. It's like, it's all connected. I remember I had a teacher that would always say that, so it's all connected. It's all related, because we were learning about these different, these different topics in like geography, civics, some of our careers courses back in high school. And like, we realized, it's all connected. Like all these concepts we're seeing, they're applied everywhere. So I definitely just first figure out if you're passionate. And if you're passionate about both, that's great. I think at that point, like, you have to figure out is, I think just, and this is definitely a question that most people have in life in general, but it's like, what are your end goals? Like, what do you want from this? Like, do you want, like, essentially, what are you trying, like, if you want to be somewhere in 10 years, like, where do you want to be? And a lot of people have an idea of where they want to be, and they maybe don't think about this question as much, but I think it's worth, sitting down, taking some time to reflect and figuring out, where do you want to be in 10 years? And you'll notice that if you sit down and do this, like, today, and you do it in a month, and then you do it in 6 months, your vision and your goals are drastically going to change. So I think that especially with something that's, business and technology, because there's so many ways to take it, figure out exactly what you want to do, and you'll figure out that it changes, and that's totally okay. But I think you just have to continue taking the steps in the right direction, because you'll figure out that, if you're just doing things because, this is at the intersection of business and technology, or it feels like this is what you're supposed to be doing, you'll end up doing things that you don't really want to do. And I think doing things that you don't really want to do is even worse than not doing anything at all, because you're not enjoying it. And that's not only extra work you're putting in, it's also, a mental toll, doing something you don't want and you're not as passionate about it. And I'm a firm believer in, you only get out of something as much as you put in. So if you're not putting in a lot, you're not getting a lot out of it. But if you're putting in a lot, you will get a lot out of it, whether that's in one way or another. Like whether you see it or it's going to come to, in a few years, you're going to see it. So I think, because there's so many ways to take business technology, such a broad topic, once, you know that you want to pursue it. And once you figure out what you want to do, you take some time, you think, you reflect, like you genuinely focus on where you want your life to be. I think at that point, like, I think it's some really good advice to just say, like, just go for it. I think that there are a lot of people on, you know, the internet that will, you know, try to outline like what is the, you know, the best route for you, whether they're like, you know, you should, you know, focus on, you know, like larger companies and like these roles, or, you know, you should go ahead and start a startup. Like, I think at the end of the day, it's about what you want, right? Like, I think that sometimes in some areas there may be a lot of pressure to either, you know, go to bigger companies or, you know, start a startup because that's what everyone around you is doing. But I think that it's worth it just considering, you know, what is it that you want to do, like, and then just going for it, right? Because, you know, if you don't go for it, then A, you're probably going to regret it.
Right.
But B, if you end up going, you know, doing something you don't want to do, and then, you know, you realize you want to be doing another thing, then, you know, switching it is, you know, extra time too, right?
Yeah,
if you come up with what you want from the start, and then you just go for it, you know, regardless of what people around you are saying, regardless of what everyone around you is doing, if you just stay true to yourself and you go about it, then I think that, you know, that's the way to go about it. And I think just the last, you know, I think the piece of advice that I'd give for people interested in both business and technology, I had a really good mentor say this to me, and I remember when, you know, we were talking about different ideas, right? And he said that, you know, if you have an idea that people don't look at you like you're crazy when you bring it up, then it's not an idea worth having. I think that a lot of the best ideas is, you know what, when you say the idea to someone and they look at you like you're delusional, right? They're like, what did this person just say to me, right? But the ideas that end up like going to change the world are the ones that are like, you know, truly out of the box. Like, I don't know if you saw like the rocket launch a couple of days ago, but like, you know, they launched a rocket and, you know, they caught it again.
Yeah.
Like, you know, 20 years ago, people would have said that's crazy. Right. But when you look at it now and you're like, this is like, you know, like a feat of what engineering has made possible. And the people that, you know, design the system, the people that come up with it, a lot of business went into that too. You know, coming up, you know, how exactly do we do this? Right. I think that there's room for both business technology, but I think that if you really go out there, pursue those outlandish ideas, I really think that that's going to change the world a lot more than whatever is seen as, you know, the popular thing now. It's the ideas that are really so far out there that they're kind of on the brink between, you know, being very, you know, helpful and being like so outlandish that you really can't see the difference. And I think that, you know, if you're bringing up the idea and they look at you like, wow, it's a great idea, but I think, like, you know, are you sure that this is the right thing? I think that those are the ideas that are going to change the world.
Right. And it's kind of going back to what you said earlier, like having something that records your memories for you.
Yeah.
If you told me that, I would have said you're crazy.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But it's something that I've genuinely been dreaming to do, like, since I was a kid. I wish I could replay the memories I had with my friends, right? Like, some of the stupid things we did, it's core memories, right?
Yeah.
And that idea, if you told to like 90% of the population, they would have said you're crazy, but you were able to do that just because you were passionate about it and you had, you know, well, again, just a passion for it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's always the idea of just taking the next step, right?
Yeah, I think that, especially like if you look at that idea, we definitely grabbed it from Black Mirror episode. It's the one where I think the child, the consciousness of the child's mother is like implanted with like a pet monkey, or not a pet monkey, like a stuffed monkey. I think it was. I may be getting the details wrong, but there was that episode where, you know, they implanted someone's consciousness, and, you know, that person could see everything, and we're like, okay, like, you know, if you could see your own life from like a first point of view or like, you know, a third person point of view, like that would be pretty sick, right? And it's definitely something you're like, you know, recording, you know, everything that happens, like that's crazy. Nobody would go for it. There's so many privacy concerns, right? But I think at a certain point where, okay, you can obviously refine the idea a little bit, right? Like there's better use cases for this. But even if you go with the original use case, right? Like there will still be people that want this, but it's also something that's truly unique. There within a world with so many ideas, there's only so many that you can look at and you think like, wow, that's truly incredible. That really stands out from the rest. And, you know, there are ideas that, you know, bring you, you know, a lot of money, and there will be ideas that, you know, are definitely, you know, will be more successful than others. But I think really pursuing the ideas that you're interested in, pursuing those ideas that are different, that go against the status quo, I think are, you know, really interesting ideas to be working on. And I think just at the end of the day, they'll end up being a lot more fun, right? Because there won't be as many people doing the same thing as you. So I think, you know, just breaking the status quo is a really good thing to do as well.
That's great. And that's amazing advice for our audience. Now, with that, we conclude, I think, the 7th episode. Nice. Maybe I might be getting it wrong. But thank you so much for coming on the show.
Of course.
And genuinely thank you for like just going full on depth. I'm sure the audience will appreciate it. So thank you so much. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in the next episode, which should be a week from whenever this releases. Maybe 2 weeks. Depends how lazy I am. But thank you. Have a wonderful day.